Hello and welcome. In this lecture we're going to be firing off these ball bearings from my current location. So wherever I am, it can be used to shoot at objects in our scene and already start to create a bit of wreckage and carnage. Let's dive in and see how we do this. So let's quickly review the project plan as it currently stands. We have already done our playing with physics and spawning our projectiles into the world. Now, what is coming up next is that we need to be aiming those projectiles and ideally starting them from wherever we're shooting from. So at the moment when we play the game, that little steel ball drops out, jumps up into the air, of course, but it isn't affected by where I am. Ideally, this is a kind of first-person shooting game. We should be firing these projectiles out of wherever I'm looking from. But what is it that is doing the looking here? Well, let's try and do a little trick that we can do here. It's called ejecting. And the way you do this is by holding F8. If you type F8 and then fly around, you'll see that I've kind of just stepped out of my body. That sphere there, if I select it, so the game is still playing at this point, but I'm allowed to go around and select objects. So what we've got is a object here called a default pawn, P-A-W-N, which is the same as a pawn that you might use in chess, and hence that little icon. And what that means is it's the piece, the little piece with which we are playing our game. And it is a physical representation of the player in the game world. However, if I go ahead and stop the game, either by hitting escape or by hitting the red button in the toolbar, you'll notice there is no such thing as a pawn in my scene, nor if I search my outliner, there is nothing called pawn. So what's going on there? In actual fact, Unreal is by default spawning that pawn into the scene for us, and it is placing it at the location given by an actor in the scene called player start. So if you look in the outliner for something called player start, you will see that there's this object that looks a little bit like a capsule, and it has got an icon of a controller and a flag. And what happens is that if I can move that to a different location if I want my pawn to start in a different place. I can also rotate it if I want to start in a different rotation. And I can go ahead and hit play and verify that that has indeed changed where I start in the game. Now, why is all of this relevant? It's relevant because the pawn is the thing that we want to get the location of so that we know where to put our little pinballs. So that's what we need to figure out. So let's go over into our minimal default blueprint, our level blueprint, and see if we can somehow get hold of this pawn, because we can't get a reference to it like we got a reference to the cube, because it gets spawned in when we start playing. So let's right click somewhere in an empty space in the event graph and search for PAWN. And you'll notice that one of the nodes that comes up here is called Get Player Pawn. So if that's not coming up straight away for you, you might need to type Get Player Pawn and then hit enter and bring it in. You'll notice that this is one of those nodes that doesn't have an execution pin, but it does have an input data pin and an output data pin. And now we understand those data pins a little bit better. Let's have a look at what that is. The input data pin, if you hover over it, it says it's an integer. Okay, so it's looking for a whole number. And there is a comment underneath it that says the index in the player controller list, starting with the local players and then available remote ones. So this is for multiplayer games. Seeing as we're a single player game, the index 0 is actually what we want. Index 0 denoting the first and only player. And then you can see the return value here is blue, so I'm guessing it's an object. If I hover over it, you can see that it is a pawn object reference. So it's a pawn object, which we know is an actor as well. Okay, so now with this pawn object, what could we do with that? Well, we can drag off of that pin and we can search for what we're looking for is essentially the location of the player pawn. So we can search for location And we can see that there is something called a Get Actor Location node. Let's go ahead and select that. And now you can see that the input's been connected up to the target, which is the input to this node. And then there's a new return value, which is yellow. So it's a vector. Perfect. This fits with the location that we want in our BP projectile. So let's have a go at firing these balls from the player location. You're going to, can you plug in that location, first of all, in the way that I've got it? I've got as a location, and it needs to go into the spawn node. Now, and also have a look at changing the impulse so that it travels forward so that we can move around and start shooting at the table and chairs. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So first of all, we're going to drag from the return pin of the Get Actor Location node into the input for the spawn actor, which is the spawn transform location. Let's drag that, and they're compatible. They're the same color. They're both vectors, so we can make that connection. Next up, we said we want to change the impulse direction. At the moment, it's firing straight up. What I want to do instead, I'm going to cut out of the Z and set it to 0, so we've got no upwards force. And instead, we know that if we look in our scene, the forwards direction is actually along the x-axis. But notice the x-axis is actually pointing in the opposite direction. So what we need to do is, if we had just put 1000 in, these projectiles are going to fire off backwards. So what we need to do is put in a negative 1000, and that's going to fire in the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and hit play and see if we can make this happen. So I'm going to hit spacebar, and you can see it's now firing out of my nose at the table and chairs, and I can get a little bit closer to have that impact be a little bit more impactful. I think it's still a little bit weak, so I'm going to multiply this all by 4 and go ahead and hit play. And now we have got ourselves a much more ferocious little pinball that we can fire at objects in our scene and have a little bit of fun with. So the last tweak I want to make is that these balls are a little bit light at the moment. So if we go to our content drawer and double click on the BP projectile, then it will open up the blueprint editor. You'll notice that it's got this restricted view at the moment. So you need to click Open Full Blueprint Editor to get back to what we're used to, and then click on the Viewport tab to see the preview of our ball bearing. Now I'm going to click on the static mesh component over in Components, then go to the Details pane and have a look for the mass, which I want to override. At the moment it's a mass of 100 kilos. I think I need to make this a little bit heavier, so I'm going to multiply this by 10 as a starting point. And then we can go ahead and hit play, and now when I shoot things with this ball bearing, they really do react because it is a pretty heavy piece of metal. Great stuff. So this game is actually starting to become a little bit of fun. However, we're not able to fire these ball bearings in any particular direction, only forward, and we're going to fix that in the upcoming lectures. I'll see you there.